What's up, Logic fans? It's Ash coming at you with Propositional Symbolization 5, Forms, and the main connective. Let's rock. Alright, we've got a lot of materials in place now to really start ramping things up a bit. We still have a few preliminary things to do before we can really get into the study of inference. But so far we've got our propositional constants, our variables, and the 5 logical connectives. Right? These are all in place and ready to go. However, one big question that's on our minds is how are these different symbols to be properly combined with one another? We've kind of been operating at an intuitive level. You know, you have an A, you have an ampersand, you have a B, okay? You have a C, you have an arrow, you have a not D, okay? And these things have just been sort of wielded intuitively, and we've made some allusions to it's important how parentheses are supposed to be used, but we haven't sort of given any kind of formal apparatus for how propositions are supposed to be formed. And a little bit of study here can really go a long way. Students that take a look at this can really have a lot of advantages. So we're going to take a look at how these things are combined from a rigorous point of view, and that's going to make some things down the line a lot easier to understand. And it'll also allow us to define things like the main connective of a proposition, and allow us to formally define what the form of a negation is, what the form of a conjunction is, and so on. So let's take a look at this. Alright, so we're jumping here to a Word document because that's the only effective way I can think of doing this, at least expeditiously. Now, what you have here are 7 rules, and they look horrifying, but they are much easier to understand than you think. Okay, and what they do is they systematize how we're supposed to find propositions. Okay, so and how they're built up from scratch, so to speak. This is a recipe for how to build up any proposition or propositional form we want. And in this section we focus on propositional forms, and in the next section propositions together. So let's just think about propositional forms, lowercase p, q, r, and s's for a minute. Okay, now I'm going to rattle these off, and then we're going to do a really quick example, and you're going to see how easy this is, as difficult as it looks. So what is a propositional form? Well, any propositional variable by itself is a propositional form. So for example, p all by itself is a propositional form. Q all by itself is a propositional form. R all by itself is a propositional form, and so on and so forth. Any propositional variable, okay? By itself, alone. All right. Now, given a propositional form, call it alpha. Okay. If alpha is any propositional form, you have to start with one of these guys. So suppose it's like a little lowercase p. Then putting the negation symbol and surrounding the whole thing in parentheses is a propositional form. So for example, if you've got this as a propositional form, then by PF2, propositional form 2, you can make this a propositional form. Let's go like this. It would be like that. This would be a propositional form, okay? And in a lot of cases, we're just going to omit parentheses to make things more readable. But if you always follow the rule, you've got the parentheses here, your parentheses will always be used correctly. So technically, it should look like this, but we will accept this just for ease. Okay, so that would be a propositional form. Similar, if you had started with Q, then it would look like that. If you had started with R, it would look like that, and so on. Okay, now, if you've got 2 propositional forms, maybe the same, maybe different. So you could have P, you could have P twice, you could have P here, you could have Q here. If those are forms, then putting the ampersand symbol between them and surrounding the whole thing in parentheses is a form. So for example, if you've got this as a form by PF1, and this is a form by PF1, then by PF3 you can write down P and Q, and that's going to be a propositional form too. Again, this is we're just defining it this way. These are what they are, okay? And again, if you use the parentheses, you will correctly, as this requires you to, you will always have a correctly formed form, but sometimes for readability, we just omit them. Okay, it's just a sort of notational convenience, and we could write it like that. So PF3 allows us to get the ampersand on the board, and by now you can probably see the pattern. Okay, I start with the lowercase p, q's, and r's, then I can add the negation in PF2, I can combine them with ampersand in PF3, I can combine them with disjunction in PF4, with the arrow in PF5, with the tribar in PF6, and then you have this, closure clause here, which is that nothing else is a propositional form unless it can be shown to be so by application of these rules. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at an example here really quickly so that you can really get the idea. All right, so intuitively, P or Q and R, this is the kind of thing we've been seeing. Okay, intuitively we know that that's a form. That's something that can be constructed. Prove that it can be constructed. Prove that this string of symbols here is in fact a form. Well, in order to do that, we're going to have to start first by getting all of the different propositional variables using PF1 on the board. So this is the way it would be done. We would write P in step 1, and we would indicate that we used PF1 to get that. So by PF1, P by itself is in fact a form. We would do the same thing for Q and R. So Q, lowercase, by PF1 is in fact a form. Same thing with R. R is a form by PF1. And typically this is the way we're going to start these things. We're going to start by getting all of the relevant propositional sort of atomic forms on the board. Okay, so this one is P, Q, and R, so we start off getting P, Q, and R on the board. All right. Then what we have to do is we have to start thinking about how we can combine these things using the rules. All right. Now, we might want to use, you might think, okay, well, let's use the disjunction and let's get P or Q or something on the board. But we don't want to do that yet. We want to get this Q and R together with the parentheses first, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to write Q and R, and we're going to say we got that from PF3, which is the ampersand case, and technically, right, it should have those parentheses there, and that was PF3, but it was on lines, so we'll write it this way, lines 2 and 3. Wait, this 2 here refers to line 2 here. That's where the Q was shown to be a form, and 3, that's where the R was shown to be a form. Okay, and then go ahead and pause now and see if you can't take a second to figure out what the final step is and what it would look like. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to try this. If you're not getting it, don't worry, we're just doing the introduction. Okay, so the final step would be P or Q and R, and that would be by PF, let's see, what would it be here? That's the OR that was added. It would be by PF4 on which lines? It was on lines 1 and 4, right? So this 1 refers to this P here, and this 4 refers to this line here, okay? And that's it. So typically what we do at the end of a demonstration in logic is we write Q, E, D to indicate that what was meant to be proved has in fact been proved. And this is exactly what it would look like, right? And we call these guys, these things right here, we call them form trees, all right? So this whole thing here, 1 through 5, this here, whoops, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This whole thing right here, that's called a form tree, right? A form tree proves that a given string of symbols is in fact a form, all right? So the string of symbols in question will always occur as the last line here in line 5 of a form tree. So to prove that a given string of symbols is a form, you have to produce a form tree of it where it is the last line of it, and it proceeds step by step. You can only use one of these rules, one of the propositional form rules, PF1, PF2, PF6, whatever, per line, okay? And it breaks it down so that you're convinced it is. Now, technically, of course, in 5, we should have written it like this, because that would be the technically correct application of PF4, right? It requires that we insert the parentheses in, and that, will just always ensure that parentheses are always used correctly. But as a notational convenience, we'll omit these outer ones here, and we'll just look at it like that, and there you go, okay? And that's all it is, right? So it's really simple. You have to give a little bit of thought to what you're doing, and let's go ahead and try another one. So here, show that this, with the 4 tildes, this expression here, show that that is a propositional form. And indeed it is a propositional form. So pause now and give that a shot. Alright, hopefully you've had a chance to do it. Let's go ahead and do it together here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with P as our PF1. Okay, and that's not on any line, it's just using PF1. So that is, in fact, a form. Great. And then we have to do not P, and technically there should be the parentheses. The P should be inside parentheses, but we're just going to omit it as a notational convenience, okay? But that's going to be PF2 on line 1, right? Next step, negate that, right? And that's going to be an application of PF2, but this time to line 2, right? So this whole thing here is just what you have in 2, and it got negated, and technically, again, there should be parentheses, so technically, this thing should be looking like this at this point, and that's the way negation works. But, just for the sake of readability, we use a notational convenience to make it look like this, okay? And that's how that works. And then let's go ahead and do this next one together. It would be negating that, and you tell me what should go here. That's right, PF2 on line 3. It's an application of propositional formation rule 2 applied to line 3. Okay, and what's the last one? You got it. It's the big one in question. That's going to be PF2 applied to line 4. Okay, and that is what we call QED. All right, this here is a formation tree, okay, of this form, okay, and it proves that this string of symbols is in fact a propositional form. And so again, going back to our rules, only the strings of symbols that can be built up from these rules in this sort of hyper-rigid way are in fact forms, okay? Nothing else is a form. That's the point of PF7. Alright, let's see if we can squeeze in one more example, and then I'll have to go to another video for some of the other concepts of this section. Alright, go ahead and give this one a shot. A little bit trickier, but let's see how you do with it. You have to give it a little bit of thought, alright? Let's go for it, and pause now. Alright, so here's our solution right here, and I've broken it up in a few different ways, and hopefully you're starting to notice that you have to be a little bit careful about the way in which you build it up, because the rules require you to combine things in a certain way, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Okay, so the first thing I did, and there are different correct ways of doing it, but what I did was I just established all of my propositional variables, R, Q, and S, right? And then I established all of my negation ones right here. So that was pretty easy to do. PF2 on 1, PF2 on 3 to get my negated R and my negated S. And then it's like, okay, once I've got those together, let's start thinking about how to put all of this together. Well, I wanted to get my R not S, right? So that's going to be on 1 and 5. And notice I didn't use the not R, I used this R, so PF4 on 1, right? Or not S, not this S, this one on 1 and 5. Okay, so that this is all important, all of these little details. Then I wanted to build this next guy. Now technically these brackets that I've used here should just be more parentheses, right? Because PF6 over here doesn't have anything about brackets, it just has these little parentheses. So technically they should be parentheses. That's fine. I'm doing it only for readability purposes, okay? But I think you're starting to see how it all works. And then, once I've got this whole thing, I can go ahead and finish it off with that, right? Okay, we are fresh out of time, so let's move into the next video.